Okay, so we've already looked at the file menu and the file commands. We've got a good understanding of file structure, how the ribbon works, and the quick access toolbar. Now we're going to start to get into the nitty-gritty of Excel. Let's actually put some data in the sheet. Well, as previously discussed, there's different types of data we can add into Excel. We can just type in text, but we can also type in numbers, formulas. We can apply formatting to those formulas or cells, and there's various different other objects we can add in. So first of all, I'm just going to start by typing some text into the top cell. I know that I'm going to type into the top cell in the top left because that is where my cursor is, and that is where the green little bars surrounding my cell are located. So with the cell selected, I can just type something like hello world. When I'm done typing, I have to tell Excel that I'm done typing. Excel won't automatically know. So there's a couple of ways I can tell Excel that I'm finished. I can just hit enter, and Excel will know that I've finished typing that cell, and we'll move on to the one below. Or I can try that again. Again, you will see that the cursor is still flashing within the cell. Excel thinks that I'm still working on that cell and doesn't know that I want to move on. I can also press Tab and I will move sideways into the right out of the cell. Another way, when I'm finished with a cell, I can write my text and then simply click on another cell somewhere else in the workbook, and that will tell Excel that I'm done editing there, and maybe I want to edit over here. Now, we'll notice as we type into Excel that the text that I'd written into this column A has slightly overlapped into column B. Now, don't worry, the text is not overflowing into the cell next to it. The information will just stay within the cell that you have selected. And in fact, I can type in quite a lot of text into one cell. I press enter to tell Excel that I'm done editing. Now you'll see the text is actually sprawling across a number of columns, but the information, the data, is only stored in cell A1. And as I click into cell B1, you can see there's no information in there from looking at the formula bar. So now I've tried entering some text. Let's now look at some numbers. So to make my use of Excel semi-realistic, I'm going to add in some text, some categories, and then I'll add some numbers next to them. So let's add in apples and bananas. Let's say the quantity of apples I have is 7 and the quantity of bananas I have is 9. Now, it is worth noting the default here is that Excel will automatically right align numbers and left align text. This is one easy visual cue to tell you whether or not the numbers that you have entered or the text that you have entered is being interpreted correctly by Excel. Another thing we want to do when entering data into Excel is being able to get into the cell itself. For example, this cell here that says apples, I may want to change that apples so that it is capitalized on the A. Now I can either click into the cell, double clicking, you will see my cursor starts to flash within the cell. I'm now within the cell and I can edit by moving the directional buttons to the front, and I can delete that A and replace it with a capital A. Again, if I'm finished editing, I can press enter. Now let's say again I want to start editing the cell with bananas in it, A6. I've tried the double clicking method. Another method is to press F2. By pressing F2, my cursor jumps into the cell and I am able to edit the cell directly. The third way I can access the contents of a cell in Excel is by clicking into the formula bar. So again, if I wanted to go in and change bananas, I can double click directly, I can press F2, or I can click into the formula bar. You will now see my cursor is flashing within the formula bar, and I can add text here. Now, you will have noticed that the text that I have typed appears to have disappeared. This is not in fact the case. The text is still there, it's in the cell. It's just that from our current view, we cannot view all of the information in the cell. If I click into the banana cell again, we will see all of that information reload into the formula bar. So it's just worth understanding that even though you can have a huge amount of text within one cell in Excel, you may not be able to view that information because you only have a small view of the contents by looking at one cell. If I want to be able to view the entire contents of that cell without having to click onto the formula bar or edit in any other way, I can change the width of the column. We'll talk in more detail about editing column widths, but that's just to give you a quick demonstration of where your data is stored. And the data stored in a cell can always be much bigger than the actual dimensions of the cell itself. Okay, so we've looked at inputting some simple text and numbers into Excel. Now let's look at importing some different types of data into Excel, namely dates and times. Dates and times are effectively numbers within Excel. Excel understands them as numbers, but they are formatted into dates. This can be quite confusing at first, but I'll run through a quick demonstration of how dates are stored in Excel. So, in the simplest terms, if I want to write today's date, I can simply write in 15/01/2014, and Excel will keep that text as I have typed it in there, and it understands that it is a date. However, that number is stored in Excel as a numeric integer. How does Excel do this? Well, it does it with formatting. So this is our first introduction to number formatting. You'll see that this cell here with a 7 is labeled as general. This cell over here is also labeled as general, but this could be formatted as text instead. This number here, I want to tell Excel to specifically interpret it as a number. And you'll see by default that Excel adds 2 decimal places to anything that it thinks is a number. But automatically when I typed a date into this cell, Excel knew to recognize it as a date. Okay, next we're going to try entering time. So for the purpose of this experiment, I'm going to put in 12 o'clock. So 12 hours, 0 minutes, and 23 seconds PM. Now, Excel hasn't exactly recognized this as a time format. If I go delve into the number format options, I will see that it does understand it as time. And in fact, if I change this to time forcefully and tell it to interpret it as time, it will continue to represent the number in the same way. So now we can see how different number formatting affects the way that numbers are interpreted in Excel. Now here's the thing that we want to have a close look at. I have all of these numbers represented in their corresponding number formats, but I want to see what they are fundamentally. How is Excel storing the information? Excel is effectively storing the information as raw numbers. To look at those raw numbers, I'm going to change all of these formats to Excel's standard number formatting. Right, so what's happened there? My date that represented today has now been changed into this rather large number, 41,654. My time value that was roughly 12 o'clock in the afternoon has now been changed to 0.5. That is because this is how Excel stores dates and times. Why this number here? Why 41,654? Well, that's because that's how many days after the 1st of January 1900 there has been. So since that particular date that Microsoft picked more or less at random, there have been 41,654 days. And every time a date moves forward, more days will be added to that date. So let's try a little experiment. I know that the date I added here was today's date. Let's say I want to increase today's date by 1 day. So that will be from the 15th of Jan to the 16th of Jan. I'm going to just enter the formula bar and change that 5-4 to a 5-5. I don't need that equals sign. And hit enter. Now let's change my number back to a date. And sure enough, I will see that the date number is converted back, and by adding one number, I've added 1 day to the date. That was perhaps relatively self-evident, but what's going on with the time? Well, my 12 o'clock, expressed here as a very long decimal given the fact that I added some seconds, is telling me what proportion of a day has elapsed in time terms. So when I think about a day, 12 o'clock in the afternoon is halfway through that day, from 12 o'clock midnight to 12 o'clock midday. So we're half a day through. So let's say I was looking for a time that represented a quarter of the day. So that might be 6 o'clock in the morning. Let's type in manually 0.25 and now try and interpret this 0.25 as a time. As expected, we can see that my quarter of a day has now been turned into 6 o'clock in the morning. Now, most of the time you will simply type dates into Excel and type times into Excel, and Excel will interpret them correctly. But it's worth understanding how the number formats work in case you are working with formulas that are more advanced, or you need to make small changes to date and time values. The next thing we're going to look at in this segment is understanding how we can store numbers as text. Well, first of all, that may sound counterintuitive. Surely we want Excel to understand numbers as numbers. Well, most of the time we do, but there are a few exceptions. Let's consider I am typing in product codes for a particular item that I've sold today, and that product code has leading zeros on it. So my product code might be something like 0001245 or 46. When I click enter, Excel will automatically delete those leading zeros. It's doing that because by default it thinks that I am using a number, just a plain old number. And plain old numbers don't need leading zeros. It mathematically doesn't make sense. But I do want to keep those zeros on there. So how can I achieve that? Well, there's a couple of simple ways we can do that. First of all, I can retype my code. I'm going to jump into the formula bar, delete the contents, and now instead of typing my number immediately, I'm going to type 1 apostrophe. I will then follow it with my number, a slightly different number this time, and hit enter. As you'll see, my leading numbers are retained. Also note that the apostrophe is hidden. The apostrophe is effectively a message to Excel to interpret the data differently, but in all other respects, Excel is going to not display it to the user. I've also got a little green symbol in the top of my cell, and that is giving me this error message. It's telling me that the number in this cell is formatted as text or preceded by an apostrophe. So what Excel is telling me is that this could be the source of an error. If I try to use this number stored as text in the calculation, it would be omitted, and that could be a very big problem. However, I know that I'm typing in product IDs and I don't need to sum or count these numbers, so it is not a concern to me. I can leave that error there, it won't bother me, or I can simply tell Excel to ignore the error. The other way to enter numbers as text and keep their leading zeros is to stipulate in advance that you're dealing with a text cell. This could be useful if you've got a very long list. Let's say I want to fill up column D with telephone numbers. I've selected my column. I can now apply formatting to that column, and I'm going to tell it that the whole column should be stored as text. I can now type in telephone numbers with leading zeros, and those leading zeros will be retained. And not only that, because I've applied that text formatting to the entire column, I know that formatting will continue to be applied all the way down.